Touchstone.js.
There's a theme there.
There's a theme there. All of these are React-based libraries. I'll let him describe it more. Anything else to add? I don't know. I think ready to go?
Yeah, I think as long as I can get my display to work, right?
Are you going to mirror?
I'm going to not mirror so I can get my notes.
Got it. All right, well, I'll let Jed take it over from here.
Thank you. All right, hi everyone. It is really good to be here in Utah. It is freezing in Utah. You people who live here are crazy. It hit 44 degrees Celsius, not Fahrenheit, just a few days before I left. That's where I've come from. My name's Jed Watson. I'm co-founder of a company in Sydney called Thinkmill. We develop mobile and web apps using JavaScript. And today I've come here to talk to you about PhoneGap and React.js, and why they love each other. So sort of start off, so I'm from Sydney. This is Sydney. I'm also really into open source. I very much believe in it as a thing of value to our technical community. And I'm also married. You might be getting the impression, there's a story here that I want to tell you. And this is a story about the accessibility of technology and the importance of that, what that means to us. And it's also a bit of a personal story. But I've never given a talk like this at a conference. And this is sort of very personal and very important to me. But the theme is also how it's important in a technological sense, like things that we all care about as a community. And specifically, my story today is how this guy helped me propose to my wife. Yeah, I had a plan. The plan was I was going to design a walking tour of Sydney. We're going to walk around, and I was going to build an iPhone app that would guide her. So instead of me knowing where we were going, she would know where we were going. And I would put it on her phone in the morning before she woke up. And then she would lead us on this tour. So she doesn't know where we're going either. But when we get to a place, the app will tell her where we're going next with like a series of clues. So this was a bit of a mystery tour. I didn't want to, actually propose using an iOS app. That would be a bit lame. But I wanted to put, it really would, I know that. But I wanted to put a lot of effort into this whole proposal venture. And this seemed like a good way to kind of align things that I'm really interested in and stuff that I, spend a lot of time doing with the, effort and love that I wanted to put into my proposal. So each new location would be revealed throughout the day, and it would finally lead us to the proposal spot. Now, anyone who's got good enough eyes to recognize that I do have a ring on my finger to answer a question I was asked last night. It is from the girl that I did this proposal to. It worked. We had a lovely day. It was really beautiful. That's sort of a couple of the places that we saw, and then the picnic that we ended up at. My brother was my co-conspirator in this. Finding my friends was also really useful for him to know when we were going to get there and have it all set up. So mobile technology and proposals. The catch was I had one evening to do this. I was out of time. I had been working like nuts. I'd been basically, like, we hadn't spent a day together for a month. She had been doing this exam. We were just super busy, and I still wanted to get it done. So, technically, I also had the morning. I didn't get a lot of sleep that night. Totally worth it. I'd just been using Cordova. I'd actually just picked up Cordova or PhoneGap. I don't remember how long. It was 2012 was when this was. So it was all kind of new. And I'd realized that I could build a web app. I was a web developer at the time. I had no mobile experience. And I realized that I could pick up all of my web technology experience and I could apply it to a mobile, and I could get it rendering on a phone like an actual app. How cool is that? So Cordova create, big day out. That happened. I was going to use HTML and jQuery and CSS because it was 2012, and that's what we did back then. My local images went into the bundle, so there was no sort of lag as they were loading. I was going to use geolocations, that API, to unlock each step. I was never going to use that, let's be honest. The night before, there is no time for testing, right? Testing is really important. I wouldn't recommend putting the most important app you'll ever write in your life into production after an all-nighter with no tests. But if you're going to, don't try and include geolocation where it's going to realize that you're at a spot, because I had no way to test that the coordinates I had were even accurate. So there was an API server. I also realized I had no way to stand up a server. This is before I started using Node. This is before, Heroku was really a thing. We had all these production servers. I couldn't touch any of them. So I'm there at like 2 o'clock going, how do I create an internet accessible machine? I'm living in the future. This should be possible. And I used Google App Engine and Go for the first time in my life. That was interesting. So there was a hosted web page to update the steps, and of course my Cordova and my iPhone developer account, and I was set. My point here is that accessible technology is really important. The fact that I could take my existing skill set and apply it to something crazy and awesome was just so cool. And I want to say a heartfelt thanks to the Cordova team and everyone who's had a hand in both Cordova and PhoneGap, and the open source projects that actually made this possible. That day would have been nowhere near as cool if I didn't have your work to build on, so thank you for that. Back to what I'm going to talk to you about today, which is React. React is, I've heard a lot of things in corridors and on buses at this conference about React, and for me, honestly, it's been really accessible. It's been fantastic. It's fast to write, it's easy to refactor and scale, and it ties into, most importantly, the modern JavaScript ecosystem. And this is something that you hear a lot about. But that's sort of what I want to show you in the context of a PhoneGap app. Everyone is very familiar with jQuery and why you shouldn't use jQuery mobile. And we've seen Ember, and Ember's fantastic. And I think anyone who's ever picked up Ionic knows Angular. I wanted to give you the React perspective as well. But we've just finished 2015, and before I go any further, I want to touch on something that happened last year, which is that there was a lot of talk about JavaScript fatigue. This is a big topic, and really React was a big part of it, because all of a sudden we need build processes, and we have a new Flux framework every 2 weeks, and we've got this constantly evolving syntax and ES7, and it's sort of different ways of doing our styles, and we can put them in components and write them in JavaScript, and some crazy people are trying to stop writing CSS style sheets and just put all their styles in line, which, I kind of like that idea, but I don't believe in this. I don't think that we should be giving it the airtime that it's getting. I'm not saying that there aren't valid points to the JavaScript fatigue argument, but I am going to say that the benefit far outweighs the cost, and I think it's all a matter of perspective. Let's look at the root cause. Using a script tag in 2016 to get your scripts into the page fundamentally makes all of this cool new tech that's evolving inaccessible. Right? It's really hard to get to. I didn't know how to use Browserify. I'd ignored it for 2 years. I started writing Node and using CommonJS and modules and packages, and it was great. And then I'd write stuff for the client, and I'd still be using script tags, and I'd be using jQuery plugins, and all of my stuff would be in the global namespace. None of this is actually good. And it wasn't until I started using React that I realized that if you've just got your foundations right and you're working in an environment that kind of forces you to get up to speed, all of a sudden, when new stuff comes out, I can just have a play with it. I'm not scared of it. I'm not worried about Webpack. I'm not worried about Browserify. I'm not worried about figuring out how to plug Redux into my app. And we can learn a lot from all these things. You don't have to follow every new framework. You don't have to use all the coolest new toys, but being able to learn from them is really important. And having a mentality that facilitates that being accessible to you is also really important. If I'd been too scared to try Cordova because I had to go through an Xcode build process, then I really would have lost out. Basically, React was my great gateway drug to accessible technology. And in terms of moving forward, we're not going back to 2005. We're not going back to 2012. ES5 and script were fundamentally built on poor concepts. You've got stuff, it's got to go in the global scope if you're going to share it between scripts. This wasn't a good thing. ES 2015 and onwards actually streamlines that. It just fixes the problems. I was hoping to have all these points coming one after the other, but Babel and Webpack or Browserify is basically your fast forward. I can code like it's 2018. My browser doesn't need to know how to understand that. That's amazing. This is the first time in my, decade plus years career as a web developer that I can actually code using technology that isn't even in today's browsers, let alone in 5 years old browsers that people are still using in production. We have always had a build step. That's not new. I've been minifying my CSS since 2005, and my JavaScript since before that. We used to have Uglify. I used to run it a command line. It was never integrated into the rest of my processes, but we still did that. None of this is new. Babel and Webpack and Browserify effectively just drop in replacements for Gulp and Grunt, right? And the benefits of this is that we can get on-the-fly, pre-bundled source map support, stuff like that, like really modern techniques that actually make our lives easier as web developers and mobile developers are now instantly incredibly accessible to us. Add a plugin to your Webpack config. Also, we're doing this with all the assets, not just our JavaScript, but our images and our CSS, and all this is coming through one build pipeline now that we can control programmatically based on things like which environment we're working for. So we can do things like have hot reloading with just part of our JavaScript, and I'll show you more of that in a minute. Going back to the past, present, future theme, also a lot of the ideas that we had, I'm not trying to say that script and JavaScript sucked in 2000. Maybe some would make that argument, but we had a kind of a good idea about how to easily build interactivity in web pages, right? If you look at this, we create a function, we bind it to the onClick event in a div or a button or something, and then the user can interact with it. It's pretty straightforward. And then we kind of went on this weird tangent where we started binding our behavioral code to our presentation markup names, and also using it for presentation. And if anyone can tell me that they can successfully refactor an app that's written with jQuery and a bunch of CSS and has been in production for 2 years and know that they're not going to break anything because all that stuff is separated, I want to talk to you after this. 2016, we're kind of coming back, but there's an important distinction here. It looks much more similar to what was originally considered to be an easy way to mark up web pages with interactivity, right? We have a do stuff function, we have a render function, the render function returns a div, it has an onClick, except this time around, we're not doing all the bad things that we were doing back in 1999. We don't have event listeners that are going to stomp on each other. We don't have events that aren't going to be unbound correctly. All this stuff can be conditional. This is actually built on some really good foundations now that make your whole application scalable to much higher levels of complexity without the additional development cost. And I posit that this is because it's all happening in JavaScript. JavaScript is basically the core here. Because that slide that I showed you, that last one, that's not HTML, that's actually going to end up being JavaScript. And this is something that I think is, I'm going to say underappreciated in terms of the difference between Angular and React. Now, I'm not about bashing any framework. I think that it's not a zero-sum game, and even the better that React does and Angular has learned from that, the better off we are. Some of the best stuff in the React ecosystem, like our router, actually came out of it, two developers, one of whom had been core to the Ember team. And they were highly inspired by Ember's routing, which was excellent. We're all working together, and this is hugely beneficial to all of us. The worst thing we can do is just put up our hands and say, oh, stop feeding me new libraries. If we work together, we get a lot more out of it. So this whole Angular and React thing, what is different is that Angular is about putting JavaScript in your HTML. Basically, what we've got there is an HTML template with a for loop. I'm going to enumerate all the speakers at this conference and output their names in an unordered list. Same thing in React, right? They look really similar. The difference is that in React, we're putting HTML in your JavaScript, right? So that for me is pretty easy. Again, neither's specifically better. It's just that some people will like one more than the other. I happen to really like keeping everything together in my JavaScript, so I like React. It works for me. It helps the way I think. Other people will be very much HTML view-centric, and Angular works really well for them. And I think that these underlying philosophies are actually the biggest difference between the frameworks once you get past the technical implementation details. So when I say that React example is JavaScript, this is what I mean. It's actually going to get transpiled by my transpiler, which is going to be Babel. And it's just going to replace certain bits of code with other bits of code. And it's going to tell React to create an unordered list element. We've got JavaScript doing a map over our speakers array, and then returning more React elements. Whereas Angular was declaring a master template syntax with a custom tag syntax. Like it's just different, and that's all. What I do like about this is that it means because it's just JavaScript, I can extend it however I want. I can use map, or I could use a filter before I have the map, or I could implement a custom function there. I could get a custom, sifting sorting algorithm off NPM and plug it in and use that here, and that would be fine. So we've got these things that glue all this stuff together. And React, it really embraces the Unix philosophy. It's a library much more than it's a framework. And that whole Unix philosophy is about little packages that work together. And once you got the glue, there's this whole world of technology that works out. Like you can have hot reloading, you can have all the packages on NPM, you can use all your CSS tools, whether it's CSS modules or less, or client-side inline CSS, all that stuff works, and all of the new syntax via plugins for Babel in ES 2016. There is less framework lock-in because it's not trying to do all the things. You get a setup that works, and then you can kind of plug whatever you want into it. And they're great tools. Like, they actually make web development feel fun again. Brian mentioned this last night, and I told him that I was going to quote him on it because I think it's such a good point. So I'm going to breeze through some of these because I think that I've been going for a while and I don't want to run out of time for some actual demos. But an important point is that React is not the virtual DOM. A lot of people are like, oh, React, that's all virtual DOM diffing, and every new library launched in 2016 has that. It's not. That's really not the point. That's a technical implementation detail. It is a great idea, a great technique. It's why others are adopting it and finding it effective. But I think the real key to React, when you think about what you should be looking at, is it kind of gets us back. This is the whole past, present, future theme again. It feels like rendering on a server. On a server, we load up our application state, we generate our interface as HTML, we send that down the pipe to the browser, and the browser renders it. You take an action on that, it goes all the way back to the server, which does some stuff. It loads up its state, it generates its interface, and then it sends it to the browser renders it, right? Slow, but really easy to develop until you start trying to build more sophisticated user experiences. Man, we had it easy back in 1999. React gives us this on the client, effectively. It's the same concept. You load up your state, but now you're getting that from an API. You're generating your interface in JavaScript. That's then using the virtual DOM to worry about rendering it to the browser. It's the same cycle. I don't have to worry about how something happens. I just need to say, this is the new state of my application, and React will cause it to be so. It's really quite nice. I guess to summarize that using more technical terms, the declarative API is really what makes React fun to work with and not confusing as your application complexity increases. And it also has the focus on JavaScript for the UI components that I went through is the other thing that I personally really like about it. So let's build an app. This was fun. That second haiku, I really enjoyed that. That's how I felt about this demo. We built an app. This was built at the conference, started yesterday morning in a workshop with all this 2016 technology that I've been talking about. And massive thanks to Tommy Williams, who you'll know as Dev Geeks, and Chris Goslin for their help on this. I somehow managed to rope them in on this crazy adventure. We have a Webpack build using Babel, CSS, and Cordova scripts to make this all work. We have a Node.js API server that contains our state management and a UI for managing that state on the server. We have a React app with components and a Flux-like store in it. And we have NPM packages like XHR for HTTP requests and some tap event support in there as well. We use something called CSS transition group for animations, which means that one of the hard things about a declarative API is that you say, my interface now looks like this. Whereas on mobile, what we want the browser to understand is my interface looks like this, which is very hard to tell it with a declarative API. But by applying CSS classes, using some timing magic, that's all abstracted away from us, and we just need to add and remove elements using that declarative API, and this wrapper will take care of the magic of applying classes appropriately. It'll leave a div in there with an exiting class until the animation's finished, and then it will pull it out. So we're not leaving dumb nodes around, taking up memory and causing more jank in our UI, but we are getting the animations that we want. Yeah, yay. Also, new React.js template. So we are going to be extracting the meat of this, which is all the Webpack config, all the build process and steps, and everything else that you need to get up and running with a Cordova app with React, and throw it into one of those shiny new templates that are part of the latest Cordova and PhoneGap release that came out yesterday. So that will be coming to you thanks to the Cordova PhoneGap teams soon. You get to play with all this stuff. And I'm going to jump into some code. So this is all up on GitHub. We actually built this in the open. We were all just interacting and committing to master together around the bar at the hotel last night. So very few people have their laptops out, but if you do and you kind of want to play along, then all this code is up there. You're welcome to have a look at it. And you'll be able to see the progression of how we got to where we did in the time that we spent as well, which is kind of an interesting story unto itself. So what I should probably tell you, aside from the fact that I hope this works, I really do, I really do, is, so I didn't mention what the app was that we built, but I'm sure that some of you will have guessed. We recreated my engagement app. So we decided to take what I'd done in 2012, and since I don't even know where my source code for that is anymore, and I certainly don't have it with me in Utah, yeah, we basically recreated that whole thing because it's a really nice little simple demo of how to create a React app. So what I'm going to do first is get my, figure out where this monitor is. There we go. Just going to get my project and take you on a quick tour of what we've got set up that actually makes this work. And I'll also grab this and run it so you can actually see what I'm talking about. We need 3 scripts to run it. I'll get to that in a second. So, all right, heart of any project, the package JSON. This has got our dependencies and scripts that make this stuff work. So I've highlighted these as little callouts to make this clearer. Can everyone actually see that? I'll make it bigger. Is that, wave at me if you still can't read what's on the screen. 1, okay. Let's go with that. So the scripts that actually run here, we've got scripts for running, standing up the iOS and Android simulators, actually building for production, compiling. We do a Cordova prepare. This is pretty straightforward stuff. So I'm going to start the node server with npm run server. And I'm also going to run npm start to kick off the dev Webpack server so I can actually show you what's going on here. And pull up my Chrome. Okay. And there's the front page of the app. And there's my server. So now that that's running, let's step back through what I've just done. I'm going to start with the server because that's really the simplest. I mean, by simple, I mean there are less than 30 lines. And this is a stateful node server that's going to respond to a post request to set the current available steps. So remember the story of the proposal was I didn't want her seeing the next step until we were at the one just before it. So I would be progressively unlocking these through the day. And this is an emulation of the interface, a really ugly emulation of how this works. So I would actually step through and I would unlock steps as we went. So this is a server that actually runs that, as well as we've got this tiny little template for actually rendering some forms to set that state. That is not what I came here to show you, but it is a necessary part of the story. The next part is, so this is all we needed to do that. I've got Cause plugin, so it actually works in Cordova. I've got EJS for that form template, and I've got Express. That's it. Very simple. The next step is the build step. And these are the dependencies and dev dependencies. I've probably got some of them in the wrong group because it's like 12 hours. I noticed this when I was prepping before, but these are the dev dependencies that we needed to get that build process running. So, I mean, when you look at a package JSON that looks like this, it's kind of intimidating. You're like, there's so much stuff there, which is why I wanted to break it down and say what we've really got is Babel with some presets, Webpack, and a couple of loaders for Webpack, and then this fancy replace thing that I'm using to generate a dynamic or alter my config.xml dynamically so I can switch between local dev in the simulator versus like production dev. And that's tied into the build scripts as well, very quickly, by my config script and my environment detection. So that's how that works. Then we've got the Webpack config. Now, this is a bit challenging. Like, really, you want one of these that works, and you don't want to have to figure this stuff out yourself. So that's one of the major benefits that I think we'll get out of having this in the template, in the PhoneGap templates. So that would be nice. But this does what it needs to. It will take care of our styles. It will use Babel for transpiling all this scary new code into stuff that actually runs. And in development, we've also got a hot reloading server, which, who here has used a hot reloading server before? Yeah, that is not enough for you. I want to get more hands like by this time next week because this stuff is really, really fun to use. So that's how our config works. So when I've run npm run server, it started that Node app. When I've run npm start, it has booted up the Webpack dev server and set my config for local development. What I'm then able to do is have a look at the app. And that's the actual size of it. So this is, like, I've crippled this so I can sort of start showing you early what actually goes on behind the scenes here. This is really just rendering a UI at this point. And what's happening is I've got my W's directory. It's got a very simple index HTML in it. And then I've got my app folder. And my app folder is where all the fun happens. This is the actual source code for my application. And when you see what I've done is I've kind of paired it back from the one that's actually working on GitHub to a simpler version so we can build it up together because I'm a sucker for live coding. I've only done one talk in my life where I haven't live coded, and I see that as a missed opportunity to get the whole lot. So I'm going to do some today. Green means it's a file that I've got for reference, so you don't actually have to watch me painstakingly typo all this code out. But yeah, this file here boots our app. One thing we do that's kind of weird is we import our CSS. That's a Webpack thing. You don't have to do that. I'd never used Webpack until yesterday morning, so I wanted to try this out. It also means that our CSS and our JavaScript can live together kind of more nicely. So what this is doing is creating a React class and rendering it into my app div, which was cunningly placed here earlier in our HTML file. And it's rendering a start component. It's importing that start component from my components folder here. And my start component looks like this. And this is actually the wrong one, because oh no, that's fine. It could be even simpler. That actually doesn't need to be there. And what you're seeing here is like the minimum amount of code required to get a screen rendering in React in a browser. Now, what's cool is I can change this. And I haven't refreshed. That just updated. In fact, I'm going to put these side by side to make it much clearer what's going on here. So let's say, just to really make this clear, I'm going to add an input element. All right, now I've got this input element up here. I'll just make that. I don't need to make it bigger. You'll get the idea. So if I type into this and I put my cursor in the middle, it's going to actually still let me replace other components without losing my focus position or my input in the element. So when you're iterating on an app, that is incredibly powerful. You know, I might have a whole lot of app state loaded. Like I might have signed in. That sign in might have taken a while because I might be, either talking to a slow API, or it might be social sign-in, or it might be a client-side encryption, which is something that Tommy was telling me about, one of his use cases. We worked on a Bitcoin app mid last year where everything about loading the state was slow, and refreshing the app just to test something and iterate on it was killing us. So this is really useful. Now, what I want to do is something more interesting than just add some elements to the screen. I want to make this getting started process work. I need to be able to tap that button and go to the next screen. So here's one I prepared earlier. What I'm going to do to make this work is I'm going to use something called a store. Now, there's a ton of patterns out here, and again, like, one of the things I like about React is that it doesn't enforce any of its opinions on you, other than it's taking care of updating how stuff is rendered to the screen. So I'm going to create a store. There's a lot of patterns for this. The most popular one around these days would be Redux. It's amazing work by Dan Abramov, and it works really nicely with the hot reloading as well, because it's basically an immutable state store. So you can actually replace the logic in your store and maintain the state of your data with full history. If you didn't follow that, but it sounds interesting, look up his talk on hot reloading with time travel at React Europe 2015 and watch it. It will blow your mind. I must be like the 100,000th person at a conference to have said that since that talk. It's insane. But what we're going to do is use something simpler. So I'm going to sort of demo the point that I can go and find something on NPM that's going to do exactly what I want it to do, which is just basically be an event dispatcher. So I can listen for changes to something and respond to it in my UI. So all I need to do is come over here. I'll stop my bundler for a moment and npm install save, what are we going to call this? Store prototype. There we go. I was going to be so upset if NPM was down for this demo. Not that NPM ever really goes down. It's like GitHub. Sorry, GitHub. So we've got store prototype now. I'll just pull the docs for that to sort of give you an idea of how this would work in the real world. I'm going to go full disclosure, this is one of mine. And that's not my account that can't be billed. But yeah, this is it. So here's my docs on it. It's pretty easy. All I really need to do to be able to use this component that I've just found on the internet now in my code is that npm install line. And now I just say, well, I'm going to create the store. That's actually what I'm going to do. And here's the store. So kind of here's one I prepared earlier, but pretend I was writing this code without running out of time to show you all this stuff. All I need to do to start using it is just require store prototype in my code, and I get it. And then I use it as described here in the docs. So I need to create a new store. I need to create some private variables to look after my data. And then I'm going to extend my store with methods that I want to expose that are going to do stuff. And I'm done. I can use those methods. So I'm going to create 3 functions to start with. I want to be able to get the state of the store or the app. Like, this is actually the state for my main component. I can store all of my application state in here if I want to, and then listen for changes to it from any of my components. So I need to know which step we're up to, how many are available, how many there are in total, and if we're going forwards or backwards, so I can animate that. And then I'm going to expose next and previous methods that will let us move forward or backwards in the number of available steps. And that's, the 35 lines that let that happen. And then to actually use this in the start screen and proceed past that first step, this is all I need to do. So I'm going to take this, get the step store from there. That's not all I'm going to do. I'm going to need more than that. Nope, no, I'm not. This is my start. I'll go back to home. Okay, so all I want to do in this particular component is when that button gets tapped, I want to tell the step store to progress to the next step. So the other thing I'm going to do is use a component called React Tappable. I swear I'm not just up here to promote my own stuff, it's just, it works really well. This is basically fast-click or Hammer.js written specifically for React. It takes care of all the stuff that we would need. So instead of using a div with an on-click, I'm going to use a tappable with an on-tap and get a whole lot of all the fast-click style stuff out of that. And that's it for my start component. And coming back to my app component, now what I need to do is say, well, I've got to load this data into my app so I can actually use it. I've got to render the right step. So I need to get all that stuff out of the store as well. And then I need to, let's have a look at what I need to do actually. It's right here. Basically listen for changes to that and update it when they occur. So I'm going to paste that in and then just quickly go through the differences. So first things first, I'm going to add some state to this component. So let's just have a look at this. If I took out my start and just turned that into a hello world, if I got time, I don't really have time for this. And it's not running. I do need to restart my bundler. All right, I'm going to skip that and just say that this works because I do want to make it all the way through this. Quick overview of what we've just added is basically I'm going to make this a stateful component by declaring a getInitialState method. That's just a lifecycle event in React. If I declare it, it's there, and then my component has state. I'm also going to hook into other lifecycle methods to say when this component mounts, when it appears in the DOM, I want to start listening for changes to that in that store. And when it unmounts, when it goes away, I want to stop listening. And then when either of those things happen, I'm going to update my state, which is just going to do the same thing. So this is like kind of 8 lines of boilerplate. I've then blown my render up a bit. I've added a CSS transition group so that every time I render a new step or the start screen into the children of that component, it's going to transition it for me. And then I have this render current step function that looks at the state, says if the current step is 0, then we render the start screen, and if it's not, then we render a step and we pass it, how many are available so it knows whether it can go backwards or not. And all that should work. So let's just see if it actually does. Hey, look at that. That works. And I probably want to change the current step to 1. And now what's going to happen is nothing, because I'm not paying any attention to the API yet. But this is basically the idea of the app. Obviously, it starts, kind of iPhone sized, and this is exactly what my wife did all day before she was my wife. She kicked it off, and then we'd get there, and she'd see the next meal and have to recognize it and take us there. And eventually we made our way to the headland. The picnic wasn't included because that was part of the surprise. So let's just get that server interaction going quickly, and then I can wrap up for you. What we're going to do is add 2 more NPM packages, I think, from memory. I need something that I can use to actually talk to the server, so I'm going to use a little package called XHR. But I could really use anything, and this is, I guess, I'm really making the point here that it's not opinionated and it is flexible, but there's so much available that it's not hard either. So npm install save XHR. And when I've installed all the right things, this will go green. So I'm still missing something. I'm missing React tappable. So if you Googled, React touch support, you'd probably find that package, and then you'd npm install it, and then you just import it in your component and start using it as per the docs in the README. It's really easy to experiment with this stuff and try it out. So now that that's all there, I should be able to start it again. And what I want to do is get my step store and add some server synchronization to it. Now, it was very cool that Chris added WebSocket support as well to this in a branch. This was my fault. I wasn't going to merge it just before my talk because I also wanted this to work for you. But we'll merge the WebSocket stuff in shortly. We're just going to do a very persistent poll to show this off. So what I'm doing here is I've changed, I've started available steps at 1, which now just starting reloading this. I get this little stop icon down here now. I can't actually proceed past that one. What we've then got is I've got a little function here that actually calls the server and gets the available steps, parses the JSON, has some error handling in there, because because who knows what could go wrong. And then has this new update method that actually manages that. It calls fetch available step, and if it gets one back, it sets the current step, and the current step contains logic to figure out, like, I mean, if I'd accidentally pressed that button and we'd gone too far, I needed to be able to set it back. I didn't want steps later in the day ruining the surprise and showing up in her app. So I needed to make sure that I was protected there. Now, if anything changes, we call this method on the store prototype, which says notify change. And that, of course, kicks off the listeners over here, which updates the state from the store. And then our React app gets the new state. Everything gets re-rendered. So just by adding that polling to this file, I haven't changed anything else. I'm just adding polling. And now over here, when I get my current step and I change that, it's going to unlock. And now I can get to step 2. And I can go to step 4, which means I can proceed. And then if I go back to step 2, ooh, I'm locked. It's just gone back to step 2. Thank you. And that's pretty much it, except for one other thing that I wanted to show you, which is that I've got this constants file that I'm using on both the client and the server. So if total steps is no longer 4, but I've added one, and that's now 5, I'm actually requiring this file from my store. I think I'm requiring it in my store. Yeah, there it is. And I'm using it to set my total steps. But I'm also using it in my server over here. So I can actually share code, logic, config, settings, all of this stuff, not just NPM packages that can work on the client and the server. And it's not limited to the benefits of something like isomorphic or universal rendering. It's also really cool that you can actually share important environment data just by requiring a file. So that's where my config went. And now if I go and update everything, I didn't need to reboot that one, but I do need to reboot this one. And now we should see that we've got a 5th step here, and I can get all the way there, and that was the last, that was where it all kind of finished. So there's a lot of benefits to living in this new ecosystem that become immediately accessible once you get over a couple of little hurdles, like we just need a build process and to realize that we're writing JavaScript, and then it gets really fun. Because the last thing I'm going to show you before I go back to my talk, okay, I really got to be quick about this. No, I'm not even going to show you, but I could like change CSS, it live reloads in my browser, and this all works in the simulator as well, which is really, really interesting when you're actually looking at this on an iPhone and it's live reloading while you're coding. Like that's kind of the holy grail of developer productivity there. So I am going to skip all of the rest of my slides. There are escape hatches. Not everything has to be in React. We have stuff like React Hammer, which is the Hammer library was mentioned earlier. It hooks in. It's okay to not immediately write everything in React like you might want to, but that's fine. We also wrote a library called Touchstone.js. So, I mean, I call it Ionic for React. That's totally oversells how robust and well documented it is. It really does. But it sort of meets the same need where you've got a whole UI component library that you want that looks and feels native. We're actually working with the PhoneGap team now, which is very exciting to improve the community support around that in the docs, but it's all open source. And if you're interested in working with React and want some components, check this out and help us make sure it meets more use cases than just the ones that we've applied it to. There are other things like React Canvas. So Canvas as a smooth rendering target can be managed from React, and it looks and feels exactly the same as what I've just been showing you. That's by Flipboard. That's how they released their most recent app with sophisticated UI and 60 frames a second support in a browser. And it's really exciting that Onsen UI is going to be looking at React as well. And there's a Ratchet port for React. So if you've used the Ratchet thing from the Bootstrap guys, that's also available. And that's me. Thank you.